One morning, I was really late for work on base, and so my supervisor, of course, has a key to your dorm room. She came in thinking she was going to catch me sleeping, and instead she found me unconscious on my dorm room floor. As the doctors and nurses are all starting to stand over me, it became like something out of a movie or a TV show where my vision starts to kind of go to the left, to the right, and things get hazy, and it just didn't feel like reality. And then the voice to the left of me said, "You're going to have air is going to travel up your arm. It's going to be really painful, but everything's going to be okay." Finally, after trying to continually look over to my left, I finally did. And not only was there nobody to the left of me, but I saw the screen completely flatline. But in that moment, as I saw myself flatline, I started traveling upwards. It was the best feeling I think I could ever experience. It was like this beautiful, blissful, just this feeling of love surrounding my body. My name is Chase Skylar DeMayo, and I grew up in Orlando, Florida. My grandparents actually adopted me from the day I was born. My mother had me way too young. She was 17, and my biological father was, had no interest in being in the picture. But luckily, my grandparents had already adopted quite a few other children. So I actually have 2 Korean sisters, a Korean brother, and a black brother. You don't think about, your grandparents adopted you and your parents are different until you start going to school and people start pointing out that you don't look like your siblings. We would go out to eat and people would ask, "What church are you with?" Because it didn't make sense that all of these different looking kids are all part of the same family. We would pile out of an actual, Tropic Traveler bus, if you remember those. And we just had this great childhood. In 7th grade, I had an opportunity to join an ROTC, a middle school, military program. And I jumped at the opportunity. I was one of the first volunteers. My grandfather served in the military and my great-grandfather served in the Navy. And so there was always this something inside of me that said, this is what you need to do as well. Certainly wasn't a burden. It was something that I was really excited to, feel that call of, to go and defend the country that I really loved. And so as soon as I could join, the second I turned 17, I joined the Air Force because my dad, who served in the Army, said, "If you're going to join any branch and you're going to let me sign paperwork for you to join, you're going to join the Air Force." Because I think he was always a little jealous of how good the Air Force had it. And, as a parent, you want the best for your kids. So the Air Force it was. From basic training, I joined as a SERE instructor, SERE, and that's Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. The job of a SERE instructor is to essentially learn the terrain for pilots, and then you would train the pilots if there was ever a mishap or an accident, how to survive off the land. Not long into that training, I injured both of my knees. It was just a training accident, unfortunately. It's like getting hurt in practice. It's kind of embarrassing, but both kneecaps kind of came out and ruptured out. And the surgery that they were going to do is called a lateral release, and it's where they reset the kneecaps back in. Looking back now, I probably could have rehabbed it without surgery and still been doing the original job, but the surgeon in the Air Force said that surgery was the best course at that time, and unfortunately the knee surgery wasn't a success. Up until that point, I had a clear goal of what I wanted for my life and what I expected for my life, 20 years in the military. And once the knee injury happened, it started to crumble, my goals and my vision for my life. It was catastrophic for me. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I started to get really scared and really nervous. My friends were worried about me just because I felt like my life was caving in. They start this process of retirement where they say, your body is no longer good enough, to stay in the military. And it is a long process. During that time, I started showing up late. I was young and a little bit unprofessional in that sense where I knew I was going to get out of the military. So what are they going to do? Are they going to fire me? So I would show up late every once in a while to my office. So one morning I was really late for work on base. And so my supervisor, of course, has a key to your dorm room. She came in thinking she was going to catch me sleeping. And instead she found me unconscious on my dorm room floor. So they sent me immediately, of course, to the Langley Air Force Base Hospital. where they hooked me up to every machine possible, started doing blood work, started doing tests to figure out why I was unconscious on my, dorm room floor. And they couldn't find anything wrong. I was young and I was in the best shape of my life. There was just really no reason why I should be unconscious, right? So they, of course, looked into everything that a doctor should look into. Was he on drugs? Was he drinking? Was it something like that? And at the time, I never touched a drug, still haven't. So they just couldn't make sense of why I was unconscious. So the nurse then said, we're going to do a couple more tests. We're going to do a chest x-ray on you. And if we can't find anything, then we're just going to send you back home. It just, there's really no reason for you to be here still. When she fiddled with my IV, she walked out of the room. From that moment, everything changed. I heard the alarm start going off, and it became like something out of a movie or a TV show where the alarms are going off and my vision starts to kind of go to the left, to the right, and things get hazy, and it just didn't feel like reality. And the nurses and doctors start kind of running in. I was at the end of the hallway, in my hospital room. So they were almost running into the wall. They're running in so fast as the alarms start to blare. And I obviously, of course, knew something was really wrong. As the doctors and nurses are all starting to stand over me and work on my body, somebody sat down to the left of me and started stroking my arm, telling me everything was going to be okay. And while this alarm is going off and while people are shouting and you can hear the nervousness in their voice, I was very aware that they knew something was wrong. And then the voice to the left of me said, you're going to have air is going to travel up your arm. It's going to be really painful, but everything's going to be okay. The pain that started to come up my arm, the best way I can really describe it is like a silver bullet, just a giant bullet. It felt like something 5-10 times too large in that vein. It was so painful that you could almost feel every kind of centimeter or inch of it traveling up. I mean, it really was like a train headed towards, my heart. And I remember my right leg kind of kicking up in the air while those nurses and doctors were above me, just kind of like a natural reaction or reflex to this pain traveling up the arm. But the calm voice to the left of me was so assured and petting my arm. And at the time, you're a military guy, the thought of having a guy kind of stroke my arm, probably if you would have asked me then, was like, I don't want a guy stroking my arm, what are you doing, But it was so calm and reassuring to have somebody to the left of me just saying, it's going to be fine, it's going to be okay. It's such a weird feeling to feel so calm while you're experiencing so much pain, which is really confusing. And while nurses and doctors are shouting at each other, I could so vividly hear the voice to my left was so calm. Finally, after trying to continually look over to my left, I finally did. And not only was there nobody to the left of me, but I saw the screen completely flatline. Then that moment, as I saw myself flatline, I started traveling upwards. The best way I can describe it, and I get goosebumps every time I talk about it, it just felt like everything started to free up in my body. It felt like ice, like this really cool, beautiful feeling of my body just starting to release and kind of pour out of my chest, almost like shooting a tunnel out of my chest of light. It was the best feeling I think I could ever experience. It was like this beautiful, blissful, just this feeling of love surrounding my body. I could have experienced that feeling a million times over, and there's just no way to describe it. But I was moving upwards to this area where I couldn't see where I was going, but I just had complete trust of where I'm going is really beautiful. If this is the feeling now, I can only imagine where I'm about to go. And not before long, I ended up in this garden. And it was a garden filled with flowers and plants that we've never seen before, and it's beautiful colors, and everything was just vibrant. It was almost like looking into the sun where you have to squint a little bit because everything was so beautiful and colorful. Well, I had no preconceived notion of really what heaven was. I grew up loving Elvis, and I thought Elvis would be waiting there for me and everything would just be kind of calm and peaceful and you'd be up in the clouds. And the heaven that I experienced was so much more vivid and so much more real. There wasn't a floating sense. Your body felt so light. There's zero gravity, but the garden and the leaves were so real. These plants and flowers that were so bright, we don't have those colors here. I could say they were purple and red and blue, but it just doesn't do it justice. Everything was just so right and almost kind of womp womp. There's a vibration off of everything. You just felt so in tune and connected. When we walk past the tree or we walk down a sidewalk now, you might say, oh, that's a beautiful plant or a beautiful flower, where in heaven it felt like I was feeling the plants and the flowers. When you dream, you don't necessarily feel something. You kind of envision it, and if you're dreaming, you're off in this little world. This was so real because I was feeling things, and I felt the grains of dirt in between my toes, and I hate being barefoot, so it was a vivid memory for me that I could actually feel dirt in my feet. And ahead of me, I saw a gentleman in a robe, and he was chasing after a little boy, about 3 or 4 years old, little curly-haired blonde boy. The little boy was kind of running ahead, looking back. He was being cheeky, and as I see the boy running, I'm just watching this beautiful interaction, almost like father-son. And I watched this little boy just so happy and so purely enjoying his life. And until I got close, then you kind of look down and go, oh my gosh, that's me. I forgot I had blonde curly hair, and I used to be that happy, and I used to just laugh all the time and smile constantly as a kid growing up. No matter what was going on around me, it was always I was always a happy kid. And I think I had forgotten that by that time. By the time I was 19, I was taking life so seriously. I was so worried about career and military and all these things that I had so forgotten about being that happy little kid. And so that was a beautiful reminder of how I used to be. As I see the man turn to me, I immediately knew it was Jesus. And I should say too, Jesus didn't look like what I would have thought he would have looked like, but I was so certain it was him. He had short brown hair, piercing green eyes, and the biggest grin possible. But growing up, you see a man with long blonde hair a lot of times, and really skinny, and this man was just a healthy, peaceful man in a robe. But as sure as you're sure of what your left hand and your right hand is, and you look in the mirror and you know it's you, I knew it was Jesus. And in that moment, Jesus turned to me and he basically showed me, this is what your life should be. Spreading light, love, and laughter. Almost like a sense of a reminder that you've been here and you already know this. Like you have forgotten it, but you've always known about the joys in life, about finding any reason to make yourself smile throughout the day. And this reminder that you're taking life way too seriously. At that time in the Air Force, I really thought my life was over. Everything that I had trained for and hoped for and envisioned for my life was done. And that conversation alone was enough for me to say, okay, I'm focusing on all the wrong stuff here. I'm focusing on a career. I'm focused on money. I'm focused on making sure I can make a car payment, when really none of that at the end of the day matters. It's feeling fulfilled and feeling like I have given back to the world of making people smile. And it was such a good lesson of, this is what life is supposed to be forever. You're supposed to always find joy and laughter and happiness. And we stood there for quite a while, and time stands still. I couldn't say if it was 5 minutes. I couldn't say if it was 5 hours. It was this amount of time for me to get so much knowledge that I felt like I already knew. But it was such a friendly relationship that felt like I had spent so much time with him in the past. And before I knew it, he kind of joked and smiled and said, you have to go back. And I didn't argue. I said, yeah, I know. And it was such a reminder that I have been here multiple times. Maybe not as dramatic as a near-death experience or being flatlined, but I have been there so many times that it was just a kind of, better, you can't stick around here too long, you've got to go back. And I said, okay, I understand. And it was just this very playful, friendly thing, just like you're saying goodbye to a friend, that you've seen him before and you're going to see him again. So you're just saying bye for now. And it was very peaceful. There was no part of my body that said I wanted to stay. It was just like, spending time with a friend, and, you've got to go back to your house before you go back home again, and it just felt like it was so understood that I had a lot more to do. And before I knew it, I was back in my body in a different city, off base. So the Air Force during that time had sent me off base to Hampton, Virginia, to a different hospital for me to be pronounced dead. And I woke up and I started opening my eyes. And of course, at that time, when you have the best dream, you think it's a dream, and you kind of close your eyes to go back, and you open your eyes again. You're like, I can't go back right now. And my eyes were open and my body felt completely normal. I had no pain in my chest. Obviously, the confusion had set in of I'm not in the same room I died in, and the people walking past the hallway are not in military uniforms. So it was very clear that I wasn't on base anymore. Before long, a nurse had peeked in, and I said hello, and she looked frazzled, and she said, I'm going to go get a doctor, and took off and ran away. And a doctor came back in and said, I don't know what to tell you, but we're going to send you back to the Air Force, and they can do what they want with you. And that was it. I got a chance to call a friend and got on the phone with them and said, I just died. Can you come pick me up from the hospital? And they said, of course. And we did what every person who would die and come back does, and we went to Chick-fil-A because I was starving. I guess death made me very hungry, and we went to Chick-fil-A, and I said I'd really like to get out of town for a couple of days. I was really just confused, and I didn't want to go back and sit in the same dorm room that I was in, and we went to Washington, D.C. for a couple of days. Saw all the monuments and took pictures. During that time, my left arm was just black and blue. The bruising was so bad from that air traveling up to my heart. I went back to the hospital again because the bruising on my arm was still so bad. And I wanted an answer. I wanted to make sense of it. Why did I die? Why did I experience, the flatlining? And so I went back to the hospital, and they documented what had happened to my arm. And they wrote an entire paragraph of patient suffered an air embolism. That's when air travels up to your heart. So it looks like the nurse, on accident, allowed air to get through the IV that was, in one of the main veins for me, and accidentally flatlined me. But the nurses and doctors, they couldn't make sense of it either. I don't know how many people that they saw flatline survived. So there was never really an honest conversation with the medical staff of here's exactly what happened to you, and we can't figure out how you're still here. And from that time forward, although I didn't feel comfortable telling people the story because I felt very grounded in the sense of if I go tell people this, they're going to think I'm crazy. And that was a genuine concern because I didn't know about even the term near-death experience or an NDE. That none of that world made sense to me. I just thought people would think I was nuts, and so I just wouldn't tell people unless they were really close to me. And I just didn't know how to navigate this new experience that I had been through. By July 8th, 2008, so just a few months later, I was fully retired from the military. Within a week of me getting back, my life changed so dramatically. Anything that I had thought looked fun growing up, or anything that interested me, I said, I'm going to go do it now. I joined a breakdancing club at a local university that I didn't even go to. I ended up doing stand-up comedy for a little bit. I got into photography, and I got to photograph people's weddings. I learned how to ballroom dance and became a ballroom dance instructor. And I just was almost like checking these things off of the box of like, I have another opportunity to be here, and I'm going to go out and enjoy life. And I just did a huge list of things. I got to host, contests with celebrities and get to go on TV, and I got to be an announcer for a local baseball and hockey team in Norfolk, Virginia for a couple of years. I wanted so badly to do things that made me happy, and I could spread the light, laughter, and love that I was told to continue to share. But then this part of me, unfortunately, said, no, it's time to grow up. You have to grow up now. You have to go get a real person job. So I took a job working for a radio station, and it was a very corporate job. And I did that for quite a few years. And it was fulfilling. I paid my bills. We got a nice house, but that's when really I started to feel guilty that I became selfish, and I wasn't sharing laughter with everybody. I was sitting in an office, and I was not able to create memories for people anymore. And I went on a retreat. It was with a veteran organization that sends veterans out as a group. And you get to spend 5 days doing yoga and meditation, and they talk to you about, really focusing on your mental health and finding peace within yourself. I had never really meditated. I had never done yoga before. A bunch of macho veteran guys, doing yoga. Of course, everybody at the time maybe rolled their eyes. But at the end of the 5 days, it felt like it was the happiest I had ever been in my life. And so I got back, and my wife immediately, within minutes of seeing me on that Friday afternoon, said, "You're a different person. You seem so relaxed." And that during that time, I was so focused on my corporate job of being the serious executive. And she said, "You've changed. You just seem so happy with yourself." And in that moment, I started to ask again, what is my purpose? Why am I here? I really started to remember my near-death experience. And within a day or two, I started to feel my body completely change and become so aware of my surroundings. And I think just doing the meditation and the yoga and the breathing exercises relaxed my mind so much that I was able to really look at the outside world and get a better understanding of how I could help. I started to really realize that I had gifts that maybe weren't as common as maybe I had thought. And I started to really feel everybody's emotions around me. The intuition became stronger, and I was so aware of if other people around me, complete strangers, were suffering. At the time, I felt this burden of I need to fix everybody around me. I have to heal everybody of their suffering and try to bring any sort of positive energy I can to them to try to help them through that pain. If they're sad and they're near me, it's my job now. It's my job to help them not experience that. I really started to embrace it and accept that this is the new reality of some of the things that I'm able to offer the world. When my grandmother was in the hospital, I found out, and I started to really pray and do what I know, and it's a feeling within my chest or my heart where I can kind of put my hands out and pray for a little less pain. I know that I can't completely heal everybody, but I was just praying for a little less pain for her and a little less suffering. And before I knew it, I started to feel tingling in the palms of my hands. And I'm kind of looking down, and I put my hands down, and I'd look down again, and next thing I know, I've got really visible marks on both palms of my hands. But I knew immediately, okay, this is kind of freaking me out a little bit. And I showed my wife, and I took a picture of it because I said I need to document this and maybe show it to somebody that I trust. And I showed it to people, and immediately they said, "You have to stop taking other people's pain. It's not your pain to take." And I said, okay. In my brain, my human brain, I want to just say it's an allergic reaction. It's just something that's happening to my body, just like getting a rash on your forearm. But they started coming only at times where I was really trying to help somebody around me. So it is not a painful experience at all. It is a peaceful experience that I can visibly feel within my hands. Like an energy is coming just through that part of my hand. I was on a plane, and I think it was just completely silent on the plane, and I could never nap on a plane. And I just felt this presence that immediately kind of hit me in my chest and was like, whoa, and I knew it was Jesus again. And we just had this exchange of, hey, you're on the right path, but take care of yourself. If you drain your battery, you're not going to be able to help anybody. And he said, you have to allow people to have a human experience. You can't take everybody's pain, because some people need to experience that pain. And that was profound for me, but it also was really hard. It was a reminder that I can't go try to just heal everybody that I think is suffering, because then I'm going to suffer too. And I have to still allow people to experience this human world that we're in. And it's not my job to continually intervene into people's lives. And it would be very clear when I had the opportunity to heal people. And so that's pretty recent. That's within the last couple of months that I'm now trying to figure out how to use my gifts without interfering in people's lives. It's hard to experience what I experienced and not come back a different person. Laughter, smiling. It's such an easy thing. It's free. It's just like breath, right? Like we can breathe for free. We can pray for free. We can meditate for free, and we can laugh for free. We can find joys in everything. And we live in a world right now where it seems like we're so separated. I drive past the bus stop that I grew up going to almost daily, and I had great memories as a kid laughing and playing right before school. Nowadays, the kids are all 10 feet apart from each other on their phones, and that's tough to watch. To me, smiling and laughter and being close to people is what I think is the best medicine for us. my understanding is that we all are here to serve a very specific purpose. And not everybody's life's purpose has to be this big holy one, that we're meant to all have different goals and different personalities, just like a fingerprint is meant to be different. But for me, it's to continually learn and evolve. When you're a little kid, and when I was that little boy that I saw in heaven, when you're that age, you're absorbing everything and you're continually learning and you're experiencing everything through a view of everything is great. You don't have these grown-up constraints and stresses on you. And so I try to do that now, is continually try to learn, to stay in school, getting alternative medicine degrees, getting a ministry degree. And after that, I'm going to school again. And I think as long as we continually learn, I think we're going to leave the world in a better place. As long as we learn from history and learn from past mistakes. My grandmother has always said that education would heal the world. And I do believe as long as we are continually learning, that we are setting the next generation up to continually make it better. Knowing that, education looks different to everybody, whether you're actually in school or you're reading a book every day or you're reading the news every day, as long as it's educating you and not just making you more depressed. I think that is the meaning of life, is learning, evolving, and making everything better than how we came.
That's what's happened, the end of interference. And that's led to humanity having to make choices for itself. And a lot of things have happened since 2012 to help people, humanity, to understand the choice, and more people are becoming awakened. Hi, so I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Keana. I've had out-of-body experiences my whole life, and I've had a lot of interest in spirituality and other things throughout my life as well. I was born in Iran in 1976, and that's significant to my story and kind of how things have evolved for me the last 30 or 40 years. My parents were born in Iran, and I was born in Iran, but they moved to the UK when I was 6 months old. And 1976 has a certain meaning for me because it's the year of the dragon. And obviously now 2024, we're currently in the year of the dragon again as well, because this repeats every 12 years. I used to be a bit silly, I didn't really like, I had a car, I didn't really like wearing my seatbelt because I thought it was my way of rebelling. So I used to drive without wearing my seatbelt, and obviously in the UK you've got to wear your seatbelt, and obviously for your own safety, if you're driving, you should wear a seatbelt. So anyway, I was driving to go and see a friend, and at the time I had a mobile phone, and this is the late 1990s, and it was one of the first mobile phones that had been released. And someone tried to call me, so I pulled over because obviously you shouldn't really speak when you're on a mobile phone when you're driving. So I remember I pulled over to be able to speak on my mobile phone. It was just a friend I was meeting. We were kind of making some more arrangements, and then we were kind of making some changes in plans. So I spoke to my friend, and then as I was speaking to my friend, a police car drove past me. And when I got off the phone, and I thought, okay, I better wear my seatbelt, because I'd seen the police car, and I thought, if the police see it's not, it's against the law not to have to have a seatbelt when you're driving. So I thought I better put my seatbelt on. So I remember putting the seatbelt on and driving again. And literally about 7 or 8 minutes later, my car got hit from behind by a taxi, and I went into the back of a bus. And that was the first time I had an out-of-body experience. It was very strange. I remember about 4 or 5 seconds. I was driving reasonably fast, probably about 40 miles per hour. And I remember just having this really strange feeling of impending doom, like something bad is going to happen. And as I had that feeling, I felt myself lift from my body. And at that split second, this taxi hit the back of my car really forcefully. And I don't know what had happened to cause that for the taxi driver, but that caused me to lose control. And then I went into the back of a bus that had just stopped. It just pulled over to stop for some passengers, and I went into the back of it on the edge of it. So it was a really horrific crash. And the impact was so forceful that for weeks after, I had a big bruise all across my chest from where the seatbelt had held me. If I hadn't have put my seatbelt on, I would have gone through the windscreen. It was that forceful attack. And I basically lost my breath for a split second. But for that crash and that moment, I was watching what was happening from above my body. So that was the first time I had an out-of-body experience. It wasn't a near-death experience because I recovered from the crash. I basically, after the jolt and the shock, it took a few seconds for me to be back in my body, and I was just in my body. I was quite badly hurt in terms of the whiplash from the impact, but I wasn't anywhere kind of like on the verge of death. I was able to get myself out the car. My car was completely written off, the front of it completely gone in, because obviously a bus is very big and very heavy. And the bus wasn't that badly damaged, but the complete front of my car had been destroyed. The guy who was in the taxi, he drove off, so he didn't stop. And I just remember being really bewildered, speaking to the bus driver. They helped me to put the car on the side of the road because it wouldn't turn on. And the bus driver drove off as well and took some details to me and said, obviously, you'd have to let the insurance know. And then I ended up calling my same friend, and he ended up coming and picking up, and I called my dad. But that was the first time I had a really clear out-of-body experience. And for a few weeks after, it really changed my outlook. But the other thing it did as well was that it felt like me, in pivotal moments in my life, I've had some type of intervention like that. If I've been going down a path that I shouldn't be going down, things like that have happened to jolt me back. So what that did, me not having a car anymore, it stopped me going out. It made me focus on my studies. I had my A-level exams coming up, so I had no choice but to study because I couldn't go out. My car was written off, so I didn't have a car anymore. And I started studying, and I got my A-levels, and I went to university. And now when I look back on it, it felt like that was planned. It was happened for a reason to push me. You can call it maybe, some people talk about spirit guides, guardian angels, that sort of thing. I do believe I've got energies around there that sort of keep a watch on me. I don't know whether I would call it guardian spirits. I think it's my own higher self that watches me. But then I went to Malta in the year 2000. It was summer, the European Championships were on, the football championships. And I remember Malta is a very strange place, very sort of unusual energy there. I was always very kind of receptive to energy and feelings that kind of, I had. I was very driven by my intuition. So the energy in Malta was, I remember landing there, the energy was very unusual. It was quite heavy in some ways. But anyway, I went on holiday, and one night I was asleep in the hotel room, and I went to bed. And then I remember waking up, and when I woke up, I wasn't dreaming, I was awake, but I wasn't in my body. So I remember being awake and then floating. I was floating above my body, above the bed. And I remember looking back down, and I was able to see my body. And the thing that I vividly remember is I could see that I was connected to my body by silver cord. My outline was much more wavy in this reality. So it was energy. I could perceive myself as energy because I could see my arms and legs, but it was like wavy. It wasn't like as physical as we are now. And as soon as I became aware that I was out of my body, I started panicking, but I didn't know how to get back. And I couldn't get back into my body because on each of my arms and my legs, there was this dark energy that was holding me. So it was almost like it captured me. It wasn't enabling me to move. And then I just looked up at the ceiling, and as I looked up the ceiling just evaporated. And then I could just see the stars. And then I had this feeling of being shot into space. Then I don't remember what happened after that. Years later, I re-pieced what had happened to me, and it kind of came back to me. But at that moment, I remember just waking up the next day, but just feeling very uncomfortable. And I wasn't sure if I'd had a dream, but I knew it wasn't a dream. And I knew something had happened to me, but it was almost like my memory had been blocked, so I couldn't see what had happened to me when I'd kind of gone into space. So, and I knew it wasn't a dream, and I couldn't speak to my girlfriend at the time about it because it just sounded really strange, about my body. There's this energy holding me, so it wasn't something I could really talk to anyone about. But then I became obsessed with out-of-body experiences, and then I started reading about out-of-body experiences. I went on different forums, but I also had this uneasy feeling after that experience. And I remember about and what I mean by uneasy feeling, it hadn't been a positive experience. I felt very anxious. I'd never felt anxious before. I'd had bad experiences in my childhood, but this experience has made me feel very anxious. I felt very uneasy. I felt like there was something else was watching me. And I remember the first experience I had is I lay back as my mind was racing. I was seeing all these images, and I remember just leaving my body, and I was looking down at my body again on the mountainside, and I could just see this huge column of light energy all around the mountain, and I could see that it was like a vortex, powerful, very powerful light energy. And then I had an experience, and I had recall about what I'd experienced in Malta. And what had happened in Malta is I had been pulled out of my body, not necessarily against my will. I hadn't wanted to leave my body, but I'd made contact with, some can call them interdimensional beings, extraterrestrial, whatever you want to call them, but beings from a higher level. And what I basically made contact with was a dragon species. They're called the Draco. They've been called other names throughout history, but they're a species that's much more older than humans. Probably not positive from a human point of view, but I'd made contact with one of those beings. And the reason I'd made contact is now I know I'd had a previous life as a Draco reptilian being, and they were making contact with me. They knew I was on the planet. And I'd had a previous lifetime, but then I'd had other lifetimes beyond that in other environments as well. And they had quite a lot of influence and control on Earth, because they basically serve as a test. There's positive and negative Draco beings, dragons, if you want to call them that. They've been throughout our history. They went through evolutionary cycles before humans, and some of them chose light and others chose darkness, and they're in touch with the planet now. And the ones that chose the darkness are worshipped in some way by the kind of elites that are on this planet, or the ones that call themselves the elites. The famous people, they do rituals. They basically want to make contact with the negative force of this Draco. But it was the negative side that had contacted me because they knew my soul history, they knew the knowledge I had, and it was trying to push me into a different direction. And that's why after that experience, when I'd had contact with this being, it'd been erased from my memory. But basically they'd asked me to kind of join them in a way, or to go back down the kind of dark path. And what I mean by the dark path is a more self-serving path where you serve yourself. You keep knowledge for yourself, and you use that knowledge to enslave others and to have control over others. That's basically what they were offering me, and I'd have refused. And that's why I'd felt that anxiety and fear, and that's why I'd felt that presence when I'd read the information about the kind of battle for human souls, when I'd been working and I'd felt this presence, because they'd realized that I was awakening. And even though they tried to stop me from remembering everything, because when you go into the astral realm, or you leave your body, you're able to channel and access a lot more information than you can in the physical body. So anyway, so in 2001-2, I had what I would call an awakening. And what I mean by that is I started doing Qigong, I was doing meditation, I was beginning to perceive things and have visions about past lives, I guess, other realities. I would have very vivid dreams. And I remember I was in my first job, I'd done my master's, this was in the early 2000s. And I was doing some research for this company. And then I just happened to, I was on my lunch break, I was kind of a bit bored. I was exploring the internet, and I found this article about the battle for Earth, and it was about Malta, Valletta, and it was about something that had happened in Malta, I think in the late 50s, where some school children had gone missing. I wasn't sure how accurate this report was, but basically it was saying that Malta was an underground realm. There was an underground base in Malta, which was connected to this reptilian species, this kind of Draco species. And I started becoming really, and when I started reading this article, again, I had this very strange out-of-body feeling where I felt like it was me reading this article. And when I read about the battle for souls and a force that was fighting for the souls of humanity, I felt like I lifted out of my body, and I was looking at myself reading this, and I felt there was another presence next to me, spiritual movements. I was in my mid-20s. I was doing Falun Gong, I was doing a lot of meditation, I was reading a lot about more and more esoteric subjects, and I knew there was a conflict of some type on Earth. There was a battle, and I was beginning to realize that there was a conflict between, if you want to call it light and darkness, or good and evil. I knew that Earth was a battleground. There was something broader going on, and it wasn't, there was something about souls and your spirit. There's a conflict going on for Earth. But I was looking at different religions. My parents were Muslim, so they brought me up in the Islamic faith, but I wasn't myself a Muslim. I'd read the Quran. There's some stuff in there that I found interesting, but I didn't quite feel it was the full picture. In the future, just to answer your question, there will be more conflict, unfortunately. I'm already seeing that with tensions in the Middle East. I personally don't get involved in politics myself because, conflicts are nothing new to the human experience. Humans have been in conflict for thousands of years over land. It's just the reality of the third level. It's the way consciousness needs to evolve, and it will continue. But at some point, there needs to be a realization that war and conflict and fighting over land is just very, very childish. And it's very, if you look at it from a higher level, it's quite funny. And I don't mean that to kind of say it's not a serious issue, because I know there's people who are losing their lives and there's a lot of bad things that are happening. But from a higher level, when you actually look at it, it is quite a low level of consciousness that's been exhibited. We just need to, the planet doesn't belong to any individual person. We're souls here having an experience. And the things that we're fighting over, if you were looking at it, 100 years into the future, are quite childish, and it's a symptom of a low level of consciousness. We need to overcome that. So yeah, there'll be more conflicts, but hopefully those conflicts, they serve a purpose in that when we see the suffering of others, it's not good to watch. That needs to awaken something in ourselves, in our heart, to realize that shouldn't be what we want on this planet. We shouldn't want to see other human beings being, killed or hurt or losing their houses or their futures or losing their families. That shouldn't be anything that we want. Unfortunately, there's people there who will use this and continue this level of consciousness, because that's the whole point of the choice. We need to overcome that. You need to transcend that. We need to rise above that. So one of the purposes of my journey now in the next phase of my life is to share that, to help others, but I can't do it for them, to kind of understand this and to rise above it. And I think a lot of people are seeing that. We're going to see the truth a lot more clearly. There's lots of revelations coming out about, things that have been going on in Hollywood and, things that have been done in dark rooms by, celebrities and other. A lot of this is becoming much more obvious because we're exiting darkness and we're entering light. And that means things are going to be much more open. And it's going to cause us to look at what we want in the planet and what we accept and what reality we want to accept. So to answer your question, yes, unfortunately, there's going to be more conflicts. I kind of mentioned I'm Iranian, so, at the moment there's a lot of tension in the Middle East. And, there's potentially going to be a conflict with, Israel, Iran. I don't want to see any of that happen, because ultimately it's just going to be people who lose their lives and suffer. But there's people who've got these views about extending land and doing this, and to me it's just all very childish, and it's low levels of consciousness being demonstrated. And that's what we need to transcend in the next 10-15 years if we want to have the future that the majority of the people on this planet chose. And whether you know it or not, you've made that choice subconsciously. But I'm hoping that through no growth happens without pain. And in life, you need to go through hardship to come out and become more enlightened and to learn a lesson and hopefully to improve. So some of this stuff is going to, I guess, be necessary in a way for us to kind of enlighten and kind of see, or want to see, a kind of better future and a better outcome. So there'll be a lot more of that. There'll be a lot more upheavals. Some of our systems need to completely collapse. And the structures need to kind of disintegrate, because they're not, they're corrupt structures. You can't take a corrupt system and see a positive outcome from it, unfortunately. There are no saviors. There's talk about, I don't want to again get into politics, but, people like, the presidential candidates in the US, or, people like Elon Musk. These people aren't saviors. They're just normal human beings, and they have good things and they have bad things. There is no one who's going to save us in that sense. It's an individual choice, and that individual choice, once it becomes more confirmed, it becomes a collective direction. So we shouldn't wait for these saviors. Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, neither of them are saviors in any way. They're just part of a system, and that system is just going to replicate itself. The whole system needs to be changed for us to reach a definitely higher level of reality and a higher level of consciousness. We can't do it in the current system. We're just gonna end up repeating the same things that have happened, because the system itself is designed from a lower level of consciousness. So that's why when I had my out-of-body experience, I saw two energy grids being created around Earth to allow 2 levels of experience. So I think those of us that want to move to a higher level of consciousness realize that the systems that we currently have aren't going to get us there. They need to kind of be collapsed. And that will happen probably naturally to an extent. There'll be radical overhaul, and there'll need to be a kind of ending of those for something new to emerge. So yeah, I think it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to get more and more uncomfortable, but it's also going to be amazing. I think in the next 2 or 3 years, and it's already happened, there's already lots of groups of people making contact with high level beings, interdimensional beings, extraterrestrials. That's going to become more and more obvious and more common. And I think in 2 or 3 years' time, like as I said, the two realities that are splitting on Earth at the moment, the one reality that we're going to go towards, it's about open contact, understanding our place in the greater reality. But to get to that level, we need to have, overcome the differences that we have between ourselves as human beings. If we still have conflict and war between us as human beings, how are we going to accept beings from another planet? We're going to be a threat to them. They're not going to want to make contact with humanity. We need to grow up. So I think sorry if this is going to sound quite strict and stern, but we need to grow up. Humanity needs to grow up. We haven't got a lot more time now. A lot of humanity needs to grow up and start taking the actions that are going to genuinely lead to a higher level of consciousness. I found it difficult. I really didn't know how to share the knowledge. So anyway, I undertook writing a book. So I wrote a book which was called Exit Darkness, Enter Light, and that was published in 2012. It was published as a fantasy science fiction book, but there's a lot of spiritual truth in that book. And that was my attempt to share knowledge. And 2012 was a very important year because I knew from what I saw in my visions that the Earth's energy grid is changing. And a lot of people talk about 2012 being the end of the world. What it wasn't the end of the world. It was, in the mind kind of talked about the end of, time. What it was a kind of phase. And what it was is that in 2012, a lot of the kind of negative high level energy beings that have been influencing the planet were told they need to leave the Earth. They need to leave the humanity, and humanity needs to choose for itself and not have outside influence. So they were told to leave. So a lot of the, what people would call the Draco, quite a lot of the Greys, but not the small Greys, they're androids, the kind of taller Greys that were also here doing experiments and abductions and other stuff. They were told they need to leave. And a lot of them had to leave. They weren't allowed to interfere in the Earth anymore. But there's still remnants left here and there. And it's because humanity needs to choose for itself now. So since 2012, that's what's happened, the end of interference. And that's led to humanity having to make choices for itself. And a lot of things have happened since 2012 to help people, humanity, to understand the choice. And more people are becoming awakened. In 2019-20, we had, COVID and all of that stuff that happened as well. That was another opportunity, although, we could talk a lot about, the reality of that and what it was really about. But what it was essentially about was another shock to humanity to get people that need to begin to awaken to the reality of what's really going on the planet, and to understand that we are being controlled in some way and we need to kind of create a future that's more positive. I mentioned since 2012, we've been given the opportunity to understand what's happening, and now it's very obvious that there is a kind of a conflict for light and dark, or good and evil. People are going to be, are on an individual soul level, you need to choose what future you want for Earth. I had a vivid out-of-body experience a couple of months ago, where I left my body and I saw that there's a new energy grid that's been created around the Earth. And it's going to allow two realities to exist on Earth concurrently. So, in 2012, the other thing that happened was the majority, but it wasn't a strong majority, of humanity or souls on Earth at this time chose to move to a more positive timeline. But it wasn't a strong decision. It wasn't overwhelming. So that's why it needs more of a transition period to that, hopefully more positive, service to other type civilization. So now what we're seeing between now and 2032 is a transformation. And my second book is called Transformation. That's going to come out later this year. So the first one was exit darkness, enter light. So it's about darkness leaving, light becoming more obvious. The second book is called Transformation, which I'm finishing this year. And that's what's going to happen on Earth now, because my book parallels what's really happening on Earth. And this transition period is going to be lasting. It's been going on from 2012. It's going to last to 2032. And this time frame, this 20-year time frame, what's happening energetically and spiritually is two energy grids on Earth are going to be created. And Earth is going to split into two realities almost. There's going to be a polarization over the next few years. It's becoming more and more obvious where people are going to begin to move into communities or environments that resonate with what they want to happen and what experience they want on Earth. There's two timelines or two realities that can happen. One could be a service to self type of scenario where, everything's much more controlled. Governments have much more top-down authority. AI controls all aspects of our lives. We're not able to have freedom of speech. You can see this already beginning to emerge, this type of reality. The alternative is that we live much more in balance with nature. We become much more open to contact with higher level beings, extraterrestrials, different dimensions, whatever you want to call it. And more people are channeling this information, and that we have some sort of open interaction. And that will require a shift in consciousness for humanity to be able to accept that as a reality. We'll need to let go of a lot of our old paradigms, a lot of our old religious worldviews that serve the purpose maybe in history, but don't serve a purpose as much now. We need to reinvent our paradigms and our worldviews to open a much more broader reality and to find our place within a more galactic civilization and reality. And there's already, secret space programs, all of this stuff has been covered by others, but there is stuff like that going on. So what's going to happen is there's going to be this polarization. This choice that we all need to make on an individual level needs to become clearer in your own spirit and in your own soul. And we all have to choose, what do we want? Which reality do we want to be part of? There's going to be the opportunity for both at the same time for a certain period of time, and then it will branch off into the dominant one, which will be the service to other path, because the Earth itself needs to kind of experience a different type of reality. The Earth has got tectonic plates. It's a planet that kind of has been here to reset the cycle every 26,000 years, to allow souls to come here and learn what they need to learn, and then it resets. But now the Earth itself is not going to reset again, I don't think. I think it wants to move to a higher level of experience, because the Earth as a being, Gaia, it has its own evolution and its own experiences as well. And that's why the other path will be much more about living in communities with each other, being much more open to spirituality, understanding spirituality and our connection. Very much like the kind of American Indian philosophies of, the law of one, the great spirit, and those philosophies are on Earth already in the different religions. There's elements of it in Buddhism, Islam, Sufism, all this, about being connected and, understanding the cosmos is more about love than fear. These philosophies are already here, but it's genuinely going to be about moving into living that in reality. Because unfortunately in the past, we've had these philosophies and these understandings, but these religions have been forms of control. And normally what's happened is there's been an individual who said, I know the truth, and I understand the Bible, I understand the Quran, and they've used this to control everyone else and make money. It's always been a money-making scam, essentially, a lot of the time. And it's been a form of division, believe this is the truth, that religion isn't the truth, even though there's got lots of similarities. And it's been a way of controlling and dividing. And because a lot of people haven't been fully awakened, and it's easier to just be given answers to certain questions than really striving to find it or uncover it for yourself. These systems, these paradigms have maintained a control, but they're going to all need to dissolve. And once you have an out-of-body experience, and I know a lot of your other guests have had near-death experiences, when you realize there is something beyond the physical world, and things like heaven and hell don't necessarily exist in the way we're taught. They're just reflections of your own choices and their energy kind of resonance or experiences that you'll connect to. They're not places of punishment. No one judges you when you go to the higher levels. You judge yourself for the choices you made. And that's how it works. It's not a form of punishment. Everyone is where they need to be. Everyone will have the experiences they've created for themselves, because you're a creative being. But what happens, unfortunately, is people give their power away, and then they don't make the choices consciously anymore. And that's why a lot of people at the moment of death or whatever have confusion. because they weren't fully awakened into their own power and their understanding that they have the power to choose their reality to an extent and what that needs to be more collectively. So yeah, via my YouTube channel, I'm happy to people connect with me. But what I would like to say is I'm not a guru. I'm not here to kind of tell everyone or anyone how to live their life. I'm happy to share my understanding, my knowledge, but ultimately the work is down to the individual themselves, and they're going to know what's right for them. They're going to be the owners of their own experience. So happy to share and to have conversations. But again, I'm not claiming to be any sort of spiritual guru. And again, read my books. They're written in a kind of story style because it's more entertaining, but there's a lot of spiritual understanding and knowledge in there. So hopefully if people read that, they'll get that value from it as well. So that's the way I like to offer value, by writing books, sharing my poetry and stuff like that. So yeah, happy for people to find me through YouTube and